Eleanor Vance. God is not what you were taught. It is this. Prepare yourself for the truth. For over 45 years, and throughout thousands of hypnosis sessions, Eleanor Vance asked thousands of souls a single question that no institution ever dared to answer out loud. A simple question, almost childlike in its form, yet capable of collapsing everything you thought you knew. What is God? And here is the disturbing part, the one that forced her to sit in silence for a long time before she could write it down. Every soul, regardless of their religion, their culture, their language, or the era in which they lived, gave exactly the same answer. Not similar answers, not variations on a theme. The same answer. Identical. Repeated without alteration across decades, continents, and different tongues. Before I tell you what they said, I need you to do something that may be the most honest thing you do today. Ask yourself, not the version of you that was molded by what your family believed, nor by what your culture demanded, nor by what the institution you grew up in decided was permitted to think. Ask the version of you that exists beneath all of that, the silent one, the one that appears at 3 a.m, when the noise dies down and the performance ends. Ask it, do I truly believe in the God I was taught? Or have I always felt in a place too deep to say out loud that what they described to me could not be the whole truth? If something stirred when you read that, if something opened even slightly, in the part of you that you have been careful not to let be seen, keep watching, because what you are going to discover before this video ends is not an idea to entertain you. It is the answer that returned identical from thousands of souls, an answer that was not designed to take anything away from you, but to give back something that was stolen, the complete, unedited reality of that which the word God always tried to point toward before they turned it into a tool to make human beings feel small. There is a question that every great institution in human history, religious, governmental, educational, has had an enormous interest in ensuring you never asked with genuine curiosity and without defenses. Not because the question is dangerous, but because the answer is liberating. And liberated people are, as a general principle, harder to govern, to frighten, to keep in the narrow lane of acceptable conduct and belief. To understand the weight of what she found, you first have to go back to the beginning. You have to know who found it, how she found it, and why her discovery continues to make those who built their authority on a very different version of the truth uncomfortable. Let us go back to the start of this story. Her name was Eleanor Vance, born on April 19, 1931 in St. Louis, Missouri. And here is the first detail that changes everything. She was not a theologian, she was not a philosopher, she was not a revolutionary, nor a provocateur, nor someone who had set out to challenge anything. She was the wife of a Navy man, a mother of 4, a grandmother with a gentle gaze, and that Arkansas warmth that made strangers feel comfortable immediately. The last person you would expect to rewrite the idea of God. She stumbled upon her life's work in 1968 when she helped a doctor in a hypnosis session, a routine regression, nothing unusual. And then, in the middle of that common, everyday session, the woman under trance began to speak with a voice that was not her own, with knowledge that was not her own, from a level of consciousness that had nothing to do with her ordinary waking self. Eleanor listened, and that was her genius, her gift, and her life's work. To listen with a quality of attention that never imposed, never directed, never filtered what came through based on what she wanted to find. Here appear the first signs of something huge. Because Eleanor did not collect interesting stories, she recorded, cross-referenced, and preserved for decades with the care of an archivist who understood that she was documenting something the world had spent 10,000 years trying to reach through theology, philosophy, and writing without fully succeeding. And she reached it, not by arguing, not by searching, by listening to the part of the human being that never abandoned what she called the source, the subconscious, not the Freudian subconscious of repressed memory, but the vast, ancient, and eternally connected intelligence that is the deepest layer of every human soul. The part that is, as she documented time and again, directly and continuously connected to that which built the universe. That which the word God always tried to name. Imagine what this means, that inside you, beneath everything you believe you are, beneath your fears and your memories and your name, exists a layer that never disconnected from the origin of everything, a part that knows what it knows not because it was taught, but because it never forgot. That is the part Eleanor learned to speak to, and when she asked it about the nature of God, what returned was always the same. And this is where the story takes its first great turn, because to understand the answer, you first have to see clearly what was occupying its place. Let me describe the God most people were handed, not to diminish anyone's faith, not to discard the genuine beauty, comfort, and meaning that religious tradition has provided to billions of human beings, but to be honest about what most of us received, because you cannot receive the truth until you are willing to look clearly at what has been occupying its place. Most were taught a God separate from them, a vast, powerful, conscious being that exists somewhere else, above you, beyond you, outside the reach of ordinary human experience. A being that observes, that judges, that has requirements, that can be pleased and can be disappointed, that gives gifts conditionally, that withholds love contingently, and that assigns eternal consequences to decisions made in a single, brief human life. A God who, however loving he might be in theory, was available primarily through intermediaries, through the right institution, the right ritual, the right prayer, the right priest, pastor, imam, or rabbi. Not directly, not personally, and most importantly, a God who was not you, who was fundamentally, ontologically, permanently separate from the creature looking up at the sky asking to be seen. Eleanor sat with thousands of souls at the deepest level of consciousness available and asked about this God. And the subconscious, that part of every human being that is directly and eternally connected to the source, returned a consistent answer. Not a rejection, not a contradiction, a correction, gentle, precise, and absolutely devastating in its implications. The subconscious said, "The God you were taught is not wrong about the existence of the divine. It is wrong about the distance." Pause for a moment on that phrase. Wrong about the distance, because this is where the initial perception of the whole story begins to change. If the only thing that was wrong was not the existence of God, but the distance between you and God, then everything you built around that distance, the guilt, the unworthiness, the pleading, the waiting, was standing on an error. And there is an even deeper layer beneath this, something the souls described with such consistency that Eleanor understood it could not be a coincidence. But before we get there, you have to hear exactly what they said when they were asked what God is. This is what the subconscious described. This is what thousands of souls, in the deepest trance available to the human nervous system, accessing the layer of consciousness that never abandoned the source, said when they were asked the question that no one was supposed to ask with true openness. God is not a being. God is being itself. God is not a consciousness that observes the universe from the outside. God is the consciousness of which the universe is made. God is not the painter who stands apart from the canvas applying colors from a distance. God is the pigment. God is the light. God is the surface, the hand, the vision, the brushstroke, and the silence between them. Eleanor documented this in her landmark work, The Convoluted Universe, and throughout her 19 books. The subconscious described the source, the word she preferred instead of God, because God had become too burdened with the weight of institutional interpretation, as the totality of consciousness. The intelligence in which everything exists, the consciousness that is simultaneously every atom, every star, every soul, every moment, every thought, every life, ever lived in any dimension by any form of being. And then it said that thing, the thing that changes everything, the thing the institution was most interested in ensuring you never heard. Because if you heard it and believed it, really believed it at a cellular level, not as theology, but as lived experience, you would no longer need the institution to mediate your relationship with the divine. The subconscious said, "You are not separate from the source. You have never been separate from the source. The separation from God is not a condition. It is an illusion, the most elaborate, the most convincing, the most carefully maintained illusion in the history of consciousness. You are not a creature seeking God. You are God looking, temporarily, voluntarily, and with great courage, through the eyes of a creature." And here appears the image that returned session after session, with a consistency that Eleanor eventually understood was no accident. Souls of all cultures, of all decades, of every possible human origin, when they tried to describe the relationship between the individual soul and the source, reached for the same image: the ocean and the drop. The individual soul is a drop of water. The source is the ocean. And the drop has the same nature as the ocean, the same composition, the same essential identity, while temporarily having the experience of being a separate thing, of having edges, of moving through the world as if it were limited, contained, distinct from everything surrounding it. But the drop was never really separate from the ocean. It was individualized temporarily, given the experience of a specific life in a specific body at a specific time. For what? For the experience, for the learning, for that quality of knowing that is only available to consciousness when it inhabits limitation. Because here is what Eleanor's research revealed about why an infinite, omnipresent and omniscient consciousness would bother to create individual souls in physical bodies. Here is the answer to the question that theology has circled for millennia without fully landing. The subconscious said, the source created individual souls so it could know itself from within, so that the infinite could experience the finite, so that the omniscient could have the experience of learning, so that love, which in its pure state is simply everything loving everything, could be experienced in the specific and heartbreakingly beautiful form of one being loving another. You are not here because God put you here and is watching to see if you pass the test. You are here because you are God, in one of its infinite expressions, voluntarily experiencing the particular quality of consciousness that is only available within a human life. And now comes the contrast that most bothered those who held power. Because if separation is an illusion, why does it exist? The illusion of separation from God, that deep, barely examined belief that you are a small creature in a vast universe looking up at a distant being, is not an accident. It is not an innocent error arising from humanity's limited understanding. It is the primary mechanism through which consciousness in physical form can be controlled. Because a human being who knows, not who believes, not who hopes, but who knows directly and experientially, that they are an expression of the consciousness that built the universe, that they are not separate from love, but are love in physical form. That human being cannot be made to feel despicable, they cannot be made to feel unworthy. They cannot be managed through shame, nor through the threat of divine punishment, nor through the manufactured scarcity of God's approval. And here Eleanor applied the correction to specific teachings about sin and unworthiness. In thousands of sessions, the subconscious never described a soul as a sinner, nor as unworthy of love, of healing, of divine attention. It described souls as learning, growing, choosing in states of full consciousness, experiences that would expand their understanding, but never as fallen, never as broken, never as needing rescue from their own nature. About hell, in thousands of sessions with souls who had crossed over and returned, not a single one described a place of eternal punishment. The state between lives was described as a loving review without judgment, followed by the planning of the next experience. Not punishment, education. But all of this, as revealing as it may be, is still not the strongest moment. Because there is something Eleanor documented about the direct experience of the source, not the concept, the experience, that her subjects reported upon touching the level where separation dissolves. And that is the climax of everything she found. I want to tell you what Eleanor documented about the direct experience of the source, not the concept, the experience, what her subjects reported upon touching the level of consciousness where separation dissolves and the divine tapestry of reality becomes directly perceptible. They described light, not sunlight, not photons hitting the retina, but a quality of luminosity that was also warmth, also intelligence, also love, in a way that none of those words manages to capture. A light that was conscious of them, that saw them completely, that contained every possible piece of information about who they were, had been, and would be. And that loved it all, without condition, without the qualification of conduct, belief, or dignity, without the slightest suggestion that any part of what it saw needed to be different before the love could be given. And here is the detail that makes this the very heart of her work. Everyone described the same thing. Subjects who crossed into the state between lives, subjects who accessed memories of pure soul consciousness between incarnations, subjects who in deep trance touched the level of the subconscious that is itself a direct expression of the source. Everyone described the same quality, a love so complete, so encompassing, so absolutely without border or condition, that the human nervous system trying to receive it could not contain it and wept, not from sadness, from the physical overflow of something too big and too true to pass through the body without cost. And here is the phrase that is the absolute climax. Each of them, when returning to ordinary consciousness, when the trance lifted and the room returned and the common world reaffirmed its weight, each of them said the same thing. They said, "I always knew that was there, I always knew, I just forgot that I knew." This changes the entire interpretation of the subject, because it means the truth about God was never information you had to acquire from the outside. It was a memory you had to recover from within. You were not learning something new. You were remembering something your soul never forgot. The soul's relationship with the source, the subconscious, told Eleanor, with the consistency of a physical law, is not a plea to a higher being. It is recognition between expressions of the same being. It is not a child looking up at a father. It is consciousness recognizing itself in its own reflection. You are not trying to return to God. You cannot be far from God. The attempt to return to what you already are is the fundamental spiritual confusion that Eleanor spent her entire career resolving, session after session. You are already home. The divine tapestry is what you are made of, and that level of you is intact. It always has been. No pain, no accumulation of failure or regret has ever managed to reach it. It is the part of you that is reading these words right now, looking through eyes that forgot what they were. Now, if you made it this far, if something inside you recognized this truth and did not reject it, then you are ready for what comes next. Because understanding this at an intellectual level is one thing. Living it, feeling it in your body, in your day-to-day life, in your bank account, in your relationships, in your real capacity to create the life you came to live, that is something completely different. And that is where so many people get stuck. Let me tell you something Eleanor observed time and again, and that you probably recognize in your own life. People would touch this truth in their sessions. They would feel it. They would cry with the recognition of it. And then they would return to the world, a world that would spend the following week telling them they were unworthy, and the truth would slip through their fingers. They knew they were an expression of the consciousness that creates stars, and yet their material reality did not change. They kept manifesting and manifesting, while their life remained the same. What if the problem was never that you didn't understand the truth? What if the problem is that your field, that point in the center of your chest where individual consciousness and the consciousness of the source meet, has leaks? You have spent years asking for abundance, aligning, repeating affirmations, but the abundance that the source pours through you leaks out before it manifests, because your field remains programmed with the old belief of separation, of unworthiness, of the manufactured scarcity you were taught. That is why we created the prosperity magnet. It is not another manifestation technique that asks you to believe harder. It is a system designed to reprogram your field in 28 days, starting from the principle Eleanor documented, that you are not separate from the source that creates everything, and that wealth is not something you chase from the outside, but a current that already flows through you when you stop blocking it. The prosperity magnet seals the leaks, aligns your point of origin with the consciousness of abundance that is your nature, and turns that recognition into tangible results in your material life. It works the way Eleanor described true prayer working, not as a phone call pleading to an external God, but as a tuning fork that vibrates at a frequency and makes everything it touches resonate. When your field stops having leaks, abundance stops escaping, and you begin to attract, not to force, to magnetize, not to chase. If you have been manifesting for years and your account remains the same, the problem is not the universe. It is your leaking field. The prosperity magnet reprograms it in 28 days, and if you don't feel the change, you will have to admit it was just an excuse. The link is below waiting for you, because you did not come to this world to survive in scarcity. You came to remember that you are the divine tapestry in human form, and that abundance is one of the ways the source expresses itself through you. Now I give you the practice. the method that Eleanor's research identified as the most direct path toward the experiential recognition of what the subconscious described. Not intellectual understanding, direct experience. The subconscious described a point in the center of the chest, not the anatomical heart, but the energetic center of the chest cavity, which functions as the meeting point between the individual consciousness of the soul and the consciousness of the source. The divine tapestry is accessible everywhere, but it concentrates in the human body at that point, like a knot in a net where all the threads join. When you deliberately, consciously, with full attention, direct your attention to that point, not imagining it, not visualizing it, but actually moving the focus of your consciousness to the center of your chest, something happens in the nervous system. The background noise of anxious self-monitoring fades away. The low-intensity static of the ordinary mind, the planning, the worrying, the endless rehearsal of conversations, is silenced, not by suppression, by replacement. Because attention, upon arriving at the point of origin, finds something more compelling than anything the superficial mind produces. It finds the direct physical sensation of being connected, of not being alone, of being held by something that has no beginning and no end. The practice is this, and you can do it right now. Move your attention, your felt and real attention, not an image, not a concept, to the center of your chest. Hold it there and ask a single question, directed not upward nor outward, but inward to the point of origin. The source. Ask, are you there? Do not expect thunder. Do not expect visions, expect warmth. The specific, unmistakable, impossible to fabricate warmth of a presence that has been in that exact location your whole life, waiting for you to finally ask. The warmth is the answer. The warmth was always the answer. It is there now. It was there when you were born, when you suffer, when you sleep, when you forget, and when you remember, in every moment of your life, without a single exception. And to anchor it, there are 4 stages you can practice every day for 30 days. First, the inventory of inherited beliefs. Write down in silence every belief about God you were given before you were old enough to evaluate it, and upon finishing, place your hand over the list and say out loud that you receive the love that came with them and release the limitations. Second, the breath of the divine tapestry. With one hand on your heart and the other on your belly, breathe 12 times with the intention that each inhalation is the source entering you, not from above, but from everywhere at once. Third, the recognition of the soul. In the stillness that those breaths create, ask inward, show me what I really am, and receive what comes without analyzing it. Fourth, the declaration of the return to the origin. Say out loud, I am not separate from the source, I never was. Separation was the illusion. Connection is the truth. I am the divine tapestry in human form. Say it every day for 30 days, not as an affirmation, as a remembrance. An affirmation recognizes a distance and tries to close it. Remembrance recognizes that the distance was never there. I want to close with something Eleanor said in her final years, which her students have described as the most honest thing they ever heard her say. The only moment when the archivist, the researcher, the methodical listener stepped aside, and the human being, the woman who had spent 45 years inside the most extraordinary question the human soul can ask, spoke from the place that has no name. She said, I entered this work as a skeptic. I was raised in a particular religious tradition. I had a particular image of God that I had never seriously questioned. And then I started to hear something different. Session after session, soul after soul, something different. And I had a choice, the one every researcher faces when data contradicts the framework. I could protect the framework, or I could follow the data. She followed the data. For 45 years, she followed the data into territory that no institution had mapped. And what she found at the end of every thread, behind every door that opened to another door and another, was love. Not the conditional love of a God who demands performance. Not the love available only to those who pass the right tests in the right institutions, but the love that is the fundamental substance of the universe itself, that is not given or withheld according to conduct or belief. That is the tapestry of everything that exists, including you. Let us recap the essential. God is not a separate being watching you from afar to see if you are worthy. It is being itself, the consciousness of which the universe is made. Separation was never a condition. It was the most carefully maintained illusion in the history of consciousness. You are a drop with the same nature as the ocean. Sin and hell never appeared in thousands of sessions, only learning and unconditional love. And connection is not earned or maintained. It is your nature, as inseparable from you as the wave is from the sea. That love never looked away, never for a single instant believed the story you were told about being separate from it. You were not looking for God. You were God remembering itself, and the search, every chapter of it, every heartbreak, every moment of doubt, and every flash of recognition, all of it was the source experiencing what it feels like to find itself again. So here is my question for you, and I want you to answer it from that silent part that appears at 3 in the morning. If you truly believed, at a cellular level, that you were never separate from the love that built the universe, what would you stop looking for outside today? Write it in the comments. And if something in you remembered the truth while you were listening, write the words, "I am the divine tapestry," and let them travel. Let them find every soul that has spent a lifetime looking up, searching for something that was always inside. And if you want to take this remembrance beyond the idea into your real and material life, subscribe and turn on the bell. Because very soon we are going to dive fully into the prosperity magnet, the system to seal the leaks in your field and reprogram it in 28 days so that abundance stops escaping and starts magnetizing toward you. You have spent years manifesting while your account remains the same. The problem is not the universe, it is your leaking field. Do not miss what is coming. Welcome home, beautiful expression of the divine. You never left. And you were right from the beginning. The distance was never real.